I assume Jamie's coming in at some point.
As far as I know.
Okay, well, it is 7:01, so we'll get started. Oop. I just lost my meeting. There we go. All right, good evening, everyone. This is the South Kingstown Planning Board. It's a work session. The date is April 13th, 2021. The time is 7:02. First item is roll call. Pam, would you like to take care of that, please?
Absolutely. Paul Jordan.
Here.
Maria Mack.
Here.
Joe Murphy. Joe Murphy,
You're muted, Joe,
he's here.
but he's here.
Susan Axelrod,
Here.
Steve Demasi,
Here,
and Pam Rubinoff here. And we have our staff, Jamie Rabbit,
Present.
Jay Parker,
Here.
Brian Wagner,
Here.
Rich Bourbonnais,
here.
and Special Legal Counsel, Amy Goins.
This is Amy. I'm here.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, next item on our agenda is a major land development project, conceptual master plan, the residence on Holly. Staff has prepared a draft motion for us after we discussed this at our last meeting. And we have the revised draft motion in front of us. Not sure if anybody contacted staff, if they had any questions on what was proposed. But the motion's in front of us, and what would this?
I do have one question, probably for Amy. Under findings of fact, item K, and this is also referred to in other portions of the motion, where the reference to the low mod units occurs. Is it necessary or not to be specific about what the AMI for these has been
I asked the
promulgated?
same question today, Maria, to Jamie. And he said this is what the applicant has proposed, and it would be defined in probably a preliminary.
This is Amy. That finding references the LMI Housing Act, Title 45, Chapter 53. And that statute references other statutes which separately set the AMI range. So the answer is no, unless you want to be more specific somehow than what is contemplated by the statute.
Okay, and further on in the motion, under the conditions, there's reference number 3, number 7, reference to the AMI units. And I would just want to be sure that if we had been given a particular percentage of the AMI, that might not necessarily change from master plan to preliminary, or if it's not even necessary. So I think that's what my question was based upon.
Okay. Go ahead, Maria.
So if they had said in the meeting, oh, it's going to be say 80% AMI, but it wasn't specified in the motion, then they came back at preliminary and said, well, we've decided to go 120. And, you can't hold us to the 80 because it wasn't in the motion. Steve, I don't know if that's what you were thinking about as
Yeah,
well.
I talked to Jamie about that because I expected to see that in the conditions of approval.
Mm.
And when I reread it, I saw it under the findings of fact. So I did ask Jamie about that. And Jamie's on, so why don't we let him give his explanation for that?
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director, in an attempt to kind of quantify the question, there was discussion during the application process that 2 of the units would be 80% of AMI and the third unit would be 120% of AMI. So I think if we carry that clarity forward, either in an understanding among planning board members or if council advises to actually put that into the motion. And I would defer legal's guidance.
Jamie, thanks. Are the 80% units for rental and the other one for sale, or is that just what the applicant has proposed? And
Whether rental or sale would be 80, 80, 120. So 2 units at 80 and 1 unit at 120.
if that's what
Or
the
the three
board, yeah, if that's what the board wants to see, then it should be specific in the motion. Otherwise, be up to 120% in the case of dwelling units for sale.
So
Excuse me,
based
is
on what
anybody else
Amy-
having a hard time hearing? It seems to be very,
Yeah,
there's some
gar-
feedback, and
garbled.
then also
Yeah.
Jamie was very blurred.
Yes.
The only suggestion I can make is that whoever's speaking is unmuted and everybody else mute. When you get an echo like that, and now, did you want me to say something after that? Nope. All right, we're still getting it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to move to a different location. I had similar issues last night with connection, so I'm going to move to a secondary office in the home. Give me a moment.
Mr. Chairman, while Jamie's relocating, just wanted to remind the board that the public hearing on this is still open, and we do have members in the audience that may wish to speak.
Okay, Jay, correct me. I thought we had closed that and then we had one of the abutters was calling in and had audio problems. And we had closed it and then we did let him say his spiel. So can we just,
If you want to give me a minute, I can go back. I double checked the minutes yesterday, the day before. Well, it wasn't the day before. It must have been yesterday. And the motion that I read from the minutes was that the hearing was kept open. But I'll confirm that if you give me a minute.
okay. Amy, while he's looking at that and Jamie's signing back on, do you have a suggestion on what line item we should put it on in the conditions of approval? I mean, condition number 3, it says the approval is limited to 9 market and 3 affordable units for a total of 12. Could we just insert it there?
Absolutely. You could just add a sentence regarding the maximum AMI that would apply to the 3 units.
So we'll have 2 units at 80% AMI and 1 unit at 120% AMI.
Mhm.
Mr. Kenyon?
Well, Steve, before we leave that, I think it's not only a matter of the percentage, but also the length of time. So these inclusionary zoning, I thought, was 80% and 99 years. I realize the comprehensive permit is different than that, but I think this is coming under the inclusionary. So I think if you're going to
Condition 8
specify,
is 99 years.
okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
the motion from the minutes reads, South Kingstown Planning Board continues the public hearing for residences on Holly to April 13th, 2021.
Okay. So we'll, before we close it or make any movement on the motion, we will look to see if there's any questions. Mr. Kenyon, did you hear the amendments we were looking at? And do you have any issues?
Yes,
with
thanks, Mr. Chairman. For the record, it's John Kenyon, attorney for the applicant, Scott Hallberg. We're fine with you adding the AMI percentages in there. I would note that your inclusionary zoning ordinance requires 80% and 99 years. So I don't think you have any leeway not to go with 80%. We did have the one where we asked for relief from that, but we needed to get a variance from the zoning board, if you remember.
Yes.
With the comprehensive permit, you can change it, but with the inclusionary zoning, it's required to be 80%. And on the third one, that's 120%. My understanding is that under the state law, I don't know that that can be rental at 120%. That might be limited to 80% rental, but 120% sale.
Okay.
So would we want to state that, or will that just be determined at preliminary?
This is Amy. Thank you, John, for refreshing my memory on that. John is correct. So if we want to state it for extreme clarity, we can. But John is correct. This is not coming in as a comp permit. This is just a regular inclusionary development. So what's in the zoning ordinance governs.
Okay.
And again, we don't have any problem, for clarity's sake, if you want to.
You know, yeah, maybe John, how about this? Why don't we just put in the reference to section 502.6G? So where it says South Kingstown zoning ordinance, just reference specifically 502.6G, which does limit AMI to 80% for for sale units. Remember that for rental units, yes, it is 80% as well, but the rental calculation and the for sale calculation is slightly different as to affordability. But I think we're covered if we specifically reference the section.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from board members? Pam?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I had questioned that as well. I'm just curious on the findings of fact, J, that you referred to the basic maximum number of 12 units. And we never use that again, and that wasn't really defined. Do we need to define that further? But when you say basic maximum number and not quotes or whatever, you know, highlight. And so, but we never use that again and we don't define that. So I'm just wondering for clarification, if we should keep that in or not.
Is that some reference to a yield plan?
What in the item K, it does state the 12 units again.
Mhm.
So are you just questioning whether it's,
It has, we have 12 units several different places, but this whole thing about basic maximum number in a quote, I'm just not sure what that refers
Okay.
to and if that's necessary or not.
Sorry.
Mr. Chair.
That, go ahead, Jamie.
go ahead,
It's
Jen.
just, it's terminology. The net effect of the words is a maximum of 12 units on the site with regards to density for the project.
And that reference, Pam, is 502.6E. That defines the base density calculation. So the ordinance attempts to guide you through the, guide the developer through the process of a development that is subject to inclusionary zoning and how you come up with the numbers.
Okay. So we don't need to put that anywhere else. That's just a guidance. Thank you.
Go ahead, Susan.
Hi, everybody. I just have a question about, and maybe we've talked about this, but I don't recall. Are these standalone housing units, or is this part of a condominium association with homeowners fees? And if it is, does that terminology need to be added into this statement about sale price and, you know, like, do we need to add anything in? Are these condos?
I don't think he's established whether they're going to be rentals or sales.
Okay.
So I assume at preliminary, he'll have to make that determination, because if it is going to be sales, there will have to be a condo association set up. Mr. Kenyon, you have anything to add to that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, he hasn't made a determination which way he's going yet, but I understand Susan's question might be because of the affordability, that it takes into account the condominium fees. So that all gets factored into the 80%, Susan. So
Okay,
the price gets reduced if he has condo fees to add on to it.
got it. Thank you.
Okay. Shay, I see we have a hand up in the audience, so Stephen Schudert. You want to bring him in? Stephen, if you want to unmute yourself and just to identify yourself, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board and planning staff. Attorney Stephen Surdit for James Vasquez, the gentleman who was speaking at the end of the last meeting.
Okay, go ahead.
I wanted to, first of all, thank the board for the opportunity to speak this evening. Since the last meeting, I have been working with Mr. Kenyon to address some of the concerns my client has. I believe that Mr. Kenyon and I have come to an agreement regarding some actions that are going to be taken and incorporated into the plans at the preliminary stage, specifically, and I will defer to Mr. Kenyon to put those things on the record, but specifically, we're going to address fencing along my client's boundary line with the property. And Mr. Kenyon, correct me if I'm wrong, please. Working on some specifics regarding the vegetative buffer in that area and making it dense, as well as potentially looking at the parking located in the vicinity of the western two buildings, and looking to see if we can push that parking away from the boundary lines if at all possible, because we believe parking lots actually tend to generate noise and commotion and outside activity, which is something we'd like to keep away from the boundary line. My client and his wife have effectively been lifelong residents of Oak Street in the area. In fact, they actually remember and had relatives who owned, I believe it was the great grandparents of my client's wife, who actually owned this property originally when it was a farm. He personally is able to remember when this area was actually farmed, reaching back to some of the old principles of South Kingstown, and something that I think the board should consider as it moves forward with projects like this. And as the cottage zoning comes into effect, which we commend the applicant for not utilizing those rules on this and continuing forward on their previously submitted application, we believe that we can work with them to address my client's concerns. Obviously, my clients want to preserve as much as possible the unique nature of this neighborhood. While it's always been a buffer area between the residential areas of South Kingstown and the commercial district, there is just a lot of pressure being put on this area at this time. So we believe we can continue to work with the developer and his attorney to address the concerns my client has. He actually even, in fact, is one of the things that he was glad to see was the movement out of the walking path removal. He actually recalls a really bad assault that occurred back there in this vicinity in darker areas. So we believe that the current design is the best situation for him and the best way to try to preserve that buffer area between the residential area and the commercial areas of South Kingstown, specifically Wakefield. So I believe that we'll be continuing to work with the applicant as he moves towards preliminary. My client actually would have preferred that there only be 2 LMI units on the property, but we're deferring to the board and the board's prerogative in that regard. And with that, I would defer to Mr. Kenyon if he has any objection to anything I stated, or if there are any other questions from the board.
Thank you, Mr. Sudip. John, you in agreement with everything was just discussed?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I've had several discussions with Mr. Serta, and we've agreed to work with them. The proposed motion actually contains number 5, condition number 5, which talks about screening for the neighbors with hardscaping and landscaping. So when we come back at preliminary plan, we are going to propose a fence along the rear of his yard, along with supplemental landscaping there for the buffer. We did talk about moving the parking. I informed him I don't know that there's going to be room to move the parking. But if something happens, we will do our best to move it away from that area. But we can't guarantee anything as far as the actual parking spaces.
And maybe in conditions of approval, number 5, we can just add fencing along Vasquez property as a mitigation of noise and light to be discussed and shown at preliminary.
Yeah, that's fine. If you look at his property where that driveway comes in, it does kind of go straight into where his house is. So we
Okay.
thought it was reasonable to put a fence along his property line there.
All right. Any further comments from board members?
Only that I do think that condition number 5 does speak to issues for not only this particular neighbor, but others as well, and gives us the latitude to ensure that a combination of both, if necessary, to help act as a sufficient buffer.
Okay.
Mr.
Right.
Chairman, if I may.
Yes, John.
I did review the proposed motion with my client, and we're fine with most of it. We're actually fine with all of it. We just had a question about number 14, the traffic report. Only because I don't remember that coming up during any of the meetings from the board members. We understand that the town can require it. I just don't recall that being an issue during any hearings.
Is that on the preliminary checklist? Jamie or Jay?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I believe it is. I can double check that real quick.
So that's why that item is there. Right. So it is on the checklist, John. I guess you can discuss with staff what they think they might need, or if you think it's not needed, then perhaps you see what staff has to say about it before we come back at preliminary.
Yep. I mean, if you recall, you just recently had an application right in that vicinity that had a traffic study done. So we will be able to obtain that. I just didn't recall it being an issue with the board members.
Well, again, because it was probably on the checklist, that's how it made it on to the conditions of approval.
Jamie
Yes,
Rabbit,
Jamie.
Planning Director, just clarifying a regulatory requirement. To Mr. Kenyon's point, there is an existing traffic study associated with a property to the southeast. We can work with the applicant at the planning board's discretion about how in-depth the traffic study needs to be for the addition of 12 residential units as it relates to that traffic study, whether they can piggyback on that.
Okay.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman,
Yes, Jay.
Significantly intense development that still did not affect level of service on the adjoining roads.
I
And
just wanted to clarify, it is not a
Had a
checklist.
comment.
item.
it's not, okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman, this is Paul Jordan. I'm just sitting here thinking, yeah, we do have a traffic study for the Compassion Center, but this is additional traffic. You know, both the Compassion Center and this project are going forward. You can't look at just one traffic study and say, we know how many new vehicles there are in the neighborhood, I think. if I'm thinking about this correctly. So I don't think we need a huge effort here, but I'd like to have some idea of how many additional vehicles we'd see on Holly Street from the housing development, in addition to what we might see from the Compassion Center.
Okay,
Yes, and you know, some of the criteria and ultimate data will be based on the use, and as they are two different uses, you might come up with different numbers.
May I add something to the traffic study, the discussion of traffic study? It's Rich Bourbonnais, but you know, I'm going to tell you that a residential development the size of this is going to generate maybe 1 or 2 vehicles during peak period. And the traffic study for the Compassion Center would be an offset peak time. So I really don't know that the traffic study is going to do anything for this. I mean, you could, at this point, request a statement to the effect of how many cars are you going to generate? When do you think your peak period is going to be? Rather than a full analysis, because a full analysis is going to include all the intersection, all those things. And I know that a type of development like this is only going to generate a few cars.
Mr. Chairman,
If that.
I'm happy to take Richard's word for that. Yeah, that's fine. I don't want to unduly burden the applicant.
okay, great. All right, so we have a motion before us. What's the board's pleasure? Oh, first of all, I guess we're gonna have to,
Yeah, we would need to close the public hearing first.
so I have a motion to close the public hearing.
I will make that motion.
I have a motion from Maria. We have a second. Second from Paul. Any discussion? Pam, would you like to take the roll?
Paul, excuse me, Paul Jordan,
Aye.
Maria Mack,
Aye.
Joe Murphy,
Aye.
Susan Axelrod,
Aye.
Steve DeMasi,
Aye.
Pam Rubinoff, aye.
Okay, so the motion passes unanimously. Public hearing is closed. Now we have the draft motion in front of us as amended tonight.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion from Maria. Do we have a second?
You don't want me to
Second.
read it into the record?
Amy, with the discussion we've had tonight, do we need to read it in or just,
We usually do, not the entire motion, but we usually introduce it. I think we all know what we're
Okay.
talking about, but we might as well keep our practice.
all right.
Yes.
Why don't you read in the beginning and
So-
then
yes,
just the number
I-
of findings. of
Right,
fact.
got it. The South Kingstown Planning Board hereby grants conceptual master plan approval to the residences on Holly, a proposed 12-unit multi-household land development project containing 6 duplex structures for a total of 12, with 3 units being deed-restricted low and moderate income housing units located on Holly Street. Scott Halbert, applicant, Southern Rhode Island Professional Center, LLC owner. This approval is based upon plan set entitled Proposed Conditions Plan, Master Plan Submission for the Residents on Holly, AP 57-1, Lot 110, Holly Street in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, dated September 29, 2020, with revisions through March 15, 2021, prepared by Principe Company, Inc., P.O. Box 298, Tiverton, Rhode Island, 02878. This includes findings of fact A through O, findings of fact requested relief, including P and Q, and conditions of approval 1 through 18,
As amended tonight.
as amended tonight.
Do I have a second? I have a second from Pam. Any discussion? There's no discussion, then Pam, will you call the roll, please?
Steve DeMasi,
Aye.
Susan Axelrod,
Aye.
Joe Murphy,
Aye.
Maria Mack,
Aye.
Paul Jordan,
Aye.
Pam Rubinoff, aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously. We'll see you at preliminary, Mr. Kenyon.
Great, thank you. Have a good evening.
You as well. Next item on our agenda is the annual work program. Staff want to lead us into that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as discussed a few months ago, at a work session, planning board wanted to go over potential work items. I'm just going to pull up a file. quickly here. And can everyone see that screen?
We can.
Okay. So in the proposed budget objectives, just bear with me. Hold on one second. Actually, Mr. John, I'm just going to backpedal for a moment. Okay. Again, work plan ideas, and these are from initial discussions, and Maria Mack had contributed to this list. Again, this was some discussion began in 2020, so we had final comprehensive plan sent to council. We can check that off as a priority. Complete initial cottage and ship to council. We can check that off. Complete initial accessory dwelling unit regulations. That's on your agenda tonight, and that's also been referred to council. With regards to 2021, we had farm accessory events, research and review, upgrade to landscaping regulations, both on the zoning side and subdivision side, or in essence, changing the guidelines within the subdivision and design regulations. The second part of that was the Worsley Witten Mission Middle. We are in the process of undertaking that at the present moment. Architectural design standards with various zoning districts, primarily commercial zoning or zones. I have received feedback from a multitude of planning board members that this item here, in essence, is potentially a priority of some of the boards, which may want to warrant additional conversations. The Main Street revitalization, I think, goes in somewhat hand in hand with the architectural design standards and developing those. There were some discussions about circulation and traffic cumulative impacts. I would think that would potentially go down the list. Stormwater design and migration, had conversations with Rich Bermanese regarding their efforts there. And then the second item is again, 108 and those pressures. And I'm just going to highlight that. And then I'm going to move and just quickly put one other one in here. And again, it really is somewhere between the architectural and the Main Street renovations. And that is discussion of Lower Tower Hill. All right. And I'm just going to highlight those because Lower Tower Hill to Main Street is kind of a transitional zone. We have, 3 planners within our staff. We have a substantial permit process that we manage. And we have potentially limited access to financial resources this coming fiscal year. Although I will be making a request through the town manager's office for possibly redirecting some salaries that we should have not expended in this fiscal year and possibly reverting those to consulting fees to potentially take on some of these items. So if we can look at the architectural design standards, Lower Tower Hill, Main Street revitalization, and the Route 108 and the special management district, that is a town council group. That is staff provides administrative functions with that committee, but also that committee was looking to undertake some of the drafting of that document. And I would potentially, in my request for additional funds of the Lower Tower Hill and architectural design standards, actually request some funds so we could potentially have access to a consultant to assist in the writing of the regulations associated with 108. And I'd add to 108 Route 1 in that committee, and the potential for a special management district associated with Route 1 and the scenic corridor study. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment and just go to the other screen I had. And this comes out of the budget preparation. Again, these were potentially prioritizations within the budget cycle that went to town council. Comprehensive community plan, continue to work on the town zoning ordinance. And here you'll see farm and bed and breakfast events, landscaping design, parking requirements, and lighting. The next one is just technical assistance to boards and commission. We do that as a matter of practice. Process and technical review, that's a process issue. Finalize the development of Route 1 scenic roadway stewardship plan. I just mentioned that would in essence be part of 108 and potentially having a consultant on board to assist in the development of that stewardship plan. I'm just going to go through planning programs are a matter of course of business. Evaluating the town zone ordinance with regards to the missing middle. We have Horsley, Wetton, and Union Studios working on that. We'll continue to work on that. Hazardous mitigation and implementation standards there. Also, the town undertook a number of studies, Peacedale, Wakefield, West Kingstown, and Matunic, and potentially it's the reevaluation of those and determining what we can do to modify the zoning regulations to take some of the recommendations out of those studies. Bringing standards in line with best management practices, I think that falls in line with the development of the design standards. There was a discussion as recent as last night with town council about the government and institutional properties that may be subject of redevelopment over time and the potential rezoning recommendations that are subject to time. And whether they're undertaking now or in the future, they are recommendations within the present plan of conservation and development. We have, again, the Tower Hill Road Corridor, Form-Based Code, Architectural Design Standards, and that relates back to the four items that I had highlighted. Coastal Resource Management. We have CBD, block grant administration that we do. We're still involved in the URI master plan. And again, we're looking at increasing our efficiencies within the department. And then we have priorities within the GIS. But I'm just going to go back to the other Word document very quickly and see if we have any insight into kind of trying to prioritize what's important to the planning board as it relates to your day-to-day activities and what you see on the horizon that potentially we don't have the tools in our toolbox to address development applications as they continue to come into the planning board. So I'll be quiet for the moment.
Well, I know the Farm Act was something that, or the farm stores with the lavender that came up was kind of a priority before we, I mean, we had a lot of public outcry from that. The town council was getting numerous emails and letters asking what was going on with that. So I think that's a high priority and hopefully not a long fix. I mean, we had discussed increasing the number of acres for the minimum size. So hopefully that's something we can put up early and address and finish it. And then again, I'd like to see Lower Tower Hill Road work on that. And this board has been talking about architectural standards quite a bit. So obviously that's probably the number 2. I'd like to get farm stands out of the way just to, so it doesn't get lost for another year.
I thank Jamie for putting his list together, and I like how he was clever in bundling some of the items into paragraphs, which made them, I think, more integrated. And I think that the list that you have come up with is very comprehensive. It makes me feel good because it's longer than my list, and I didn't actually prioritize my list. Certainly, as far as I'm concerned, the architectural standards, Lower Tower Hill Road, because that represents an opportunity both for design standards, mixed use, affordable housing. It checks off a lot of the boxes. And yes, it is, it does integrate into Main Street, so to speak, even if it's not specific to Main Street revitalization in and of itself. It's part of it. Obviously, the Route 1 Stewardship Committee, that is the town council's purview, and they established the committee, and Jamie's efforts toward bringing any kind of funding into any of the initiatives that we might need consultants to help us with is greatly appreciated. Route 108, we've been talking about that for quite some time now, and that is under a lot of development pressure. So I'm certainly in agreement with these highlighted areas.
One of the
Oh, go ahead.
one of the areas that I would like to see included, and maybe it could be included in the 101, but an area for potential special management district is the West Kingston from Taylor's Landing to where Arnold's Lumber is. I think that would be a good area for a special management district, maybe some architectural standards, economic opportunities, zoning changes. You know, I think something that we pick up on the village plan and then carry it forward to maybe a 5 or 10-year plan for that area. I think that would be useful for the town.
Yeah, that's something we've kicked around for quite a while too, Joe. You're right.
I mean, the infrastructure is there, the traffic circulation is there.
That's the district you're mentioning?
Yes. Yeah, it goes from the train station down to the intersection of 110 and 138, basically. Pam, you had your hand up?
Yeah, 2 things that are potential add-ons here. And one, I wanted to bring up the question of the municipal resilience program, and maybe this is not planning board, but it would be, but the planning team. And I'm just wondering, you know, the state is putting out RFP or requests for participation in the state resilience program, and it's a little bit of a lift, but then what you get out of it is a list of different infrastructure projects that are priorities that you would want to be more resilient, and then you get you know, your top of the line for getting grants for those, you know, $250,000, $500,000 for infrastructure improvements. So I guess I just would ask the staff if that has been on the radar. You know, they have their cohort, I think now, but they're going to be putting out another request for applications, I'm sure soon. I forget where we are in the cycle, but there's you know, through the open space bond, there's a lot of money there, and those communities that already have their MRP are high on the list for getting those bond monies. And then I have another one. The other one is just more of a question perhaps, but also an implementation thing, is the coastal overlay implementation, where the zoning ordinance, I believe the overlay district calls for that applicants within the flood zone have to do some sort of an application that mirrors the beach SAMP, which I saw the beach SAMP on your list, the shoreline change special area management plan that mimics that, to look at what the future would look like under sea level rise scenarios as an informing tool for the developer to say, okay, this is what could happen, and then it gets put in their land evidence record. So those are two things that I feel need to be put on the list, and I'm not sure if they're the top priorities, but I actually think the MRP would be to start getting some of those funds.
Free money, yeah.
Yeah. And get priorities on the capital improvement plan, perhaps, of which ones might be able to become more resilient.
Susan?
Hi, everybody. So I have another thing to throw into the mix. I am looking at the comp plan and our stated goals of protecting cultural and historic resources in town. And I see a number of action points that relate to identifying and inventorying historical properties in town and historic resources, and then potentially putting some actions in place to protect these resources. And I know we learned the hard way a few years ago what happens when buildings or zones in town aren't protected. And I think some members of the Historic District Commission vocalized an interest in helping us to either expand the Historic District Commission's sense of responsibility, or create maybe a sister organization for a Wakefield Historic District, a Peacedale Historic District, and then some sort of program to identify and protect some of the buildings and resources in town from demolition or significant structural changes. And I think that before a developer comes and offers to tear down some building in this middle of our main street, and I want to make sure we have some tools to protect our sense of place in our villages, in our main street, and in Peacedale Village. So I don't know if that's a priority for others, but it is for me. And then following that, there's been a lot of chatter in town about what to do with properties which are owned by the town, and who has the authority to sell, demolish, redevelop properties that are owned by the town, and especially if they are historic properties, and even more especially if they have deed restrictions or other restrictions on them, and which department does that fall into, and whose responsibility is that? And I think maybe it's the town planning board's responsibility to work to protect the interest of the town when it comes to our historic and cultural resources.
Maria, do you remember whatever happened? We had an inventory going on, and we had a consultant that was doing it, and we had a presentation, and
Yes, they had an initial inventory, but I believe that there was going to be either a phase 2 or some other product that was going to be forthcoming. So I think it would be helpful to communicate with the HDC and see where we're at. Maybe Brian has an idea. Brian, are you the staff person for HDC?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I would have to go back and look for that. I mean, that's not an issue I've worked with them on as of yet. I can tell you that the Historic District Commission is definitely interested in issues outside of Kingston and definitely sees the importance of other areas in town. I know from talking to them that they've looked at Peacedale, they've looked at Old Main Street. There's been some reluctance from the property owners in those locations to have them zoned as historic districts. So that's a separate battle, because you need the village landowners to buy into the concept of becoming part of a historic district and seeing value in that for their village area. So it's sort of an educational and outreach program. But the Historic District Commission, also wants to be more involved in terms of on an advisory role, particularly for town buildings with historic significance, so that they are consulted. And, we have some very experienced people on that board that have some available input. So, I would definitely support, trying to make sure they're consulted when it comes to town properties.
You
Okay.
refer to town property, the planning board has always had a problem ever trying to do any overseeing of whether it's landscaping or anything when it's in town property being developed, built, or otherwise. So we'd probably need some kind of ordinance created that we would have the authority to do that.
Yes, because the town has exempted itself from development
Mm.
plan review. And thank you for that, Brian. I know that quite some time ago, Andy Tights had some ideas about not necessarily the creation of a stringent historic district, but some kind of an overlay that would provide opportunities that would perhaps make some properties eligible for federal tax credits, finding a way for them to become National Register listed, and hopefully someday have the state historic tax credits return. And that would be such a benefit to current or even future owners who may want to redevelop correctly some of these historic buildings.
Do we have any sort of authority right now to prevent, say, one of the buildings right in the middle of Main Street from being demolished and rebuilt to completely be out of step with the rest of that neighborhood? I would hate to see this bite us later because we didn't protect ourselves, like has happened in the past.
So, Mr. Chairman, to Zach Rod's point, you don't have a historic district overlay on Main Street. And again, lacking the design guidelines that we discussed earlier, you would have to be creative in your review of the application to work with the developer to replicate the look of Main Street versus having a regulatory code that you could go to that requires them to replicate the look of Main Street. So that goes back to our conversation of developing standards on the either the form-based side coupled with the architectural standards, or at a minimum with the architectural standards. And again, it can be a pictorial of what's appropriate in town in conjunction with what you deem inappropriate in town.
Yeah, I think the architectural standard would be an easier battle at this point, because until Main Street Group buys into the historical district, I can't see that happening if they're not going to buy into it. Paul?
Yeah, I do not want to add anything to the list. I do have a question about the missing middle and how that's defined. I keep thinking about affordable housing in town. What's affordable to even a full-time clerk at the hardware store, the grocery store? And maybe they are in the middle, but I'm thinking that economically they're not. They're lower down on the scale. And I feel like, I know we're making a lot of progress with the cottage zoning and some other things, the accessory dwelling units, but I feel like that lower end, which to me means rentals, and I've said this before, somebody who's working full-time at the hardware store is probably never going to be able to buy a house in town, but they certainly might like an affordable apartment. And I feel like if we don't tackle the apartment question first, there isn't going to be any land left by the time we get there. You could see some nice properties going up for cottage developments that might otherwise support denser multi-unit housing. But otherwise, I don't want to add anything terribly. I think maybe we just need to prioritize what's there, but I am curious about how we define the missing middle.
So the missing middle, and while you were speaking, Paul, I was looking quickly for a slide. The missing middle, in essence, is the discussion between the single family home and the discussion of a very significant large apartment complex. So it runs the gamut from the discussion of a duplex to a triplex, to a fourplex, to a sixplex, to the variation of densities of townhouses, and then moves to what's called a stack flat, which is your 2, 3, 4-story potential traditional apartment complexes.
Okay.
In most instances, communities have the single family and maybe the duplex, and then they have the larger scale apartment complexes, and they are missing, therefore the term missing middle, those things in between. The mansion house, the large house, small house, back house, barn, which could be a fourplex, the 4-unit townhouse. Now, South Kingston's fortunate to have some good examples of these over the years, but in most instances, they're done on larger tracts of land with a different style of housing. Just off of Main Street, you have a condo development, but again, it's almost gated, it's internal, but it doesn't address a presence on the street. And some of the discussions of the missing middle are infill in established neighborhoods, not the development on vacant lots, and how the interrelationship of that coincides with development that has already occurred in town. So, on Main Street, you may not allow 3-story apartment complexes. That would be part of the missing middle on an infill. At some point, if there are some larger businesses on Main Street that have considerable acreage for a downtown that at some point in time could relocate, or changes in the economy could become available. And there are opportunities for those modifications to be made, and devoid of any discussion, it just could be a traditional multifamily housing project or large 3-story apartment building without those design standards or without the discussion of other options available to them.
Thanks, Jamie. I think, if I had to prioritize, I think I would always just come back to affordable housing. I just keep coming back to that 850 plus deficit. And I don't see how we'll ever get there. Not to say that the other things aren't important, but that's just my take on it.
And Mr. Chairman, if I can just share a quick slide,
Mhm.
bring it up. And can everyone see that?
Yes.
So again, this is the normal discussion, we'll say in a more urban setting, but you can see where you have the detached single family to the duplex, to the fourplex, to the courtyard or cottage court, to the townhouse, to the multiplex, to the triple stack, and then larger. That's the missing middle. That's the discussion. You're in the lower range right now of that discussion with Horsley Witten and Union Studios to the duplex side by side, the fourplexes, cottage courts, discussion with townhouses. And the next phase will take you into that multiplex medium, I don't think the community gets into the triple stack and, further right on kind of this graphic representation of the Nissen Middle. You're not, that's not the scale of South Kingstown. Maybe the scale of some of the dormitory units by URI, but it's not the scale of your downtown. I think
Jamie,
you're over to the multiplex medium.
Jamie, this is a really interesting drawing. And I think will prove to be useful going forward. It's interesting how the roof lines look pretty good until you get to just beyond multiplex medium, huh?
Well, some of the discussions is when you get to those larger scale buildings, there's an architectural nomenclature associated with the big builder buildings that there should be a top, a bottom, a top, middle, and a bottom. So there's 3 aspects to a building when you start to get over 4 or 5 stories. When you look at the triple stack, there's a bottom, there's a middle, and there's no top. Now you could treat the top with articulate, fenestration on the roof line. But what's missing in this discussion is what all these buildings look like to the pedestrian on the street. Because if you're in front of that triple stacked, you're not viewing it flying over from TF Green, you're viewing it as part of the streetscape, the nomenclature of that cut through of, a boulevard with the sidewalk with some semi-private space to the front doors of those units with architectural fenestration on those facades. And I think it's a unique discussion of whether that type of building is comparable and warranted within the town of South Kingstown. I'm not sure it is at this point in time.
And Jamie, clearly this is a very broad range. I am wondering if there is any room in here and if anyone knows of anything that is in any communities within Rhode Island have done anything with tiny houses.
Yes, this is Amy. I can compile a list for you. I know a handful of them have specifically addressed it, so I'll work on compiling a list.
Great.
Good. Any other comments on the, what they'd like to see on this action list?
So if I can pull that back up, Mr. Chairman.
Based on a discussion, Jamie, you got a feel for prioritizing these and
I think what, based on the discussion, I can review with both Jay and Brian, the couple of minutes that I missed, but what I would like to do is, to Maria's point earlier, is trying to categorize these. And again, there's some cross purposes associated with each one of these that, we can't talk about the Lower Tower Hill future development without talking about architectural and design standards. And you can't talk about the Main Street revitalization without Lower Tower Hill and the architectural design standards. And the same thing with, Route 1. And I'd like to try and take a crack at lumping some of these and categorizing them and bringing that back to the board so that you can potentially put, 1, 2, 3, 4. If we had some financial resources this coming fiscal year, what would be your number 1 priority? I think with farm events and regulatory review, we can probably take that on at the staff level. I have experience with agricultural and value-added regulations in other communities. So I think we can, with Amy's assistance, work on regulations there with the planning board. The other things are a little more financially sensitive and need some specialized expertise. I can give you the basics and walk you through the beginning. But again, at some point we need to engage specialized individuals.
And Jamie, would this be framed within a sort of flexible 1-year time period or 2-year time period? We used to have the annual action agenda, and then we realized we couldn't get everything done in 1 year, so then it became biennial. Do you have any thoughts as far as how that might work?
I would like to, depending on the financial resources, it's good to have a plan. It's good to, in essence, do a timeframe and timetable of initiation and scope of not quite to deliverables, but giving the planning board an idea of what the timeframes are. How long would, if I asked you, Maria, how long do you think it would take with public input and the planning board to entertain a discussion associated with appropriate architectural design standards? That may be a 12 to 24-month discussion. There may be some things we can do regulatory, low-hanging fruit to add some terminology to the regulations to give you a little more support to what you're doing now as a planning board with regards to the South Kingston appropriateness, the South Kingston fitting in with the surrounding community, and in essence, playing nice with what's left and right of your development. But again, a few inserted paragraphs, we may be able to do that in 6 months. But again, there are steps we need to take to ultimately climb, up a floor. And we'll take a crack at putting some timeframes and timetables to what we can accomplish. And again, as I mentioned to the planning board before, we do have a request within our budget in the planning department. It is part of the capital program that is included in the manager's budget, but it is out another fiscal year. But there was a request, I think it's $275,000 over a 3-year period to undertake some of these things. My primary concern is the planning board has some momentum. There seems to be some excitement amongst the community about accomplishing a few of these things. And I would like to ride that momentum. I'm sure as the planning board would like to. And I think you'll see results hopefully sooner than later. Even if the applicants know you're talking about it, they're going to realize it's at the forefront of your consideration as you review every application.
Yeah, I mean, the architectural standards is really the hinge, because even Joe's suggestion of West Kingston revitalization of a commercial zone, you would probably want some type of architectural standard to make it appropriate to the village. So it seems a lot hangs on that.
Again, the standards will be tiered. There may be a standard and form associated with the West Kingston area and the Amtrak station and the lumberyard. And that standard will be slightly different than Peacedale, which may be slightly different than Wakefield and Main Street, which will be different than Lower Tower Hill. Mm-hmm. Similar to that missing middle where you see that stepped approach with regards to the residential articulation of what scale means as it relates to residential. I think you're going to have a similar discussion based on the different areas within the community.
And Jamie, it would also be nice if when we do move forward with missing middle, if there was a way to not only discuss, but demonstrate how, particularly when we're talking about Old Tower Hill Road, how mixed use might fit in to that whole missing middle concept, where you have a business, a commercial entity on the first floor, and then second and third is residential or some version thereof. And then I'm not adding anything, but I just wanted to mention that I know in the past, DPS had given us some idea of things that they would like to accomplish, and of course that's within their purview, but it was I believe some of it was related to an LID checklist and whatever. But since we have Rich here, do you guys have anything that you would, even though it's not within our plan, but obviously we've been working with DPS for some time to make revisions to make things move more smoothly. throughout the process?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
You know, I just submitted my MS4 permit in March. For those who don't know what the MS, they may not know what the MS4 permit is. It's a permit that actually it's an EPA permit that's issued to the state. The state allows all the communities and EPA allows all the communities in the state to jump onto that permit as part of, and it's for discharge. It's for stormwater discharge. So as part of our permit requirements is that we have to submit every year like an update just on what we've been up to. You know, we pump and clean every catch basin. We measure down on every catch basin. Just to give you an example, we measure down every catch basin in town, 2,600 and 1,000 outfalls, and we measure and then we pump up to 300 to 400 catch basins every year as part of that MS, as in a requirement of that MS4. Our soil erosion control permit comes from the MS4 permit. Something else that's been recently pushed within recent years is that we adopt or at least fill out and follow an LID survey. So it's a survey that just basically looks at what we do already with regard to LID concepts. And we really do. I mean, if you really kind of pull it all into one, and this is just my opinion, I think it requires further discussion with the planning department. But if if you look at cluster development for as an example, or things like that, those are actually LID concepts, and we can actually include that as part of this this checklist. But we do have to get this checklist done, and I believe it comes to this board at some point for review. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to Jamie about it because I knew this year I wasn't going to do it because of there's a lot of things we couldn't do in the MS4 permit, training for the staff and things like that. We couldn't do that this year because of COVID. But next year we'll be taking care of that. So that's just one item that we'd like to do. And I'd also like to modify our stormwater requirements, our ordinance that deals with stormwater. Presently, we only require adherence to a 10-year storm. So you'll notice that in meetings, I always ask if applicants are going to DEM. I really hope to hear that they are, because DEM is going to require a 100-year storm. We can't actually require it. We can't do the planning, this process. You could actually require it, but I want to see all existing lots go to 25-year storm, and then any future developments adhere to a 100-year storm. So even if we were doing, let's say, a minor subdivision, we could ask that the new lots adhere to a 100-year storm, perhaps. Those are the types of things that we'd like to take care of this year. I've already modified the ordinance. It's on John's desk. I'd like to see any subdivision regulations refer to the ordinance rather than have it in multiple places, because then when we make a change, we can make it in one spot. That would be my preference. But that is up to I guess you all. But anyways.
Thank you.
I'm just going to follow up with what Rich said, and I absolutely in agreement and alignment with him. Rich failed to mention one thing. He has been working on landscape design guidelines. We've had some preliminary discussions on those, but we would like to move them forward. I'm just going to share my screen real great because Rich spoke so eloquently. It gave me a moment to put a few thoughts together based on the conversation tonight. That architectural design standards in various zoning districts and primarily commercial zones, which includes landscape lighting and hardscape, with regards to form density design and uses, those are really applicable to all of the things the planning board talked about tonight with regards to West Kingstown, Eastdale, Main Street, Lower Tower Hill, as well as the farm events, the Route 1 stewardship, and the Route 108 SMD. So again, this is kind of where my brain takes me with the discussion of trying to categorize these and show that there's interrelationships between and commonality between all areas in town as it relates to that form density design and use discussion. So, and again, there's no intent to exclude any of the other villages in town. But I think some of the things as you develop things in West Kingstown and Peacedale, that those can transcend some of the other villages that exist within the community, whether it's Matunic, the Green Hill area. We have some small kind of hidden commercial areas around town that, again, I think they cross those paths and are interchangeable in some aspects. So I don't know if anyone has any quick comments. I know
Can I make one?
we're throwing a lot at you tonight.
Jamie, this is Susan. Thank you for doing this and sort of organizing us with, I can see it in front of me. It's a lot easier for me to understand what we've been talking about. The architectural design standards and landscape design standards, I think, are really, really important. And I'm very glad to see that on top of the list. But can we also, and I'm going to ask again, can we also potentially reinvigorate our efforts to inventory and protect our existing structures in addition to design standards for new construction or redesign? Is there something that we can easily enough get back into gear so we can work toward protecting our existing resources?
I think we should try to work through the Historic Commission and, let them do the feet on the ground work and then bring it back to us.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense.
Like, do we officially ask them to come to a meeting and talk with us, or just meet with Jamie, or how do we get that going?
Well, we had, first of all, Brian was going to do some research and see where that project was. It's probably going to need more funding. So I think that's the first step, is to ascertain where they are with that, if they've applied for funding through town resources yet, and see if we can get them to pick up the ball and start moving it again.
That'd be great.
For us to undertake that, that's a big project in and of itself. And I think they're just better equipped with their backgrounds to handle that.
I agree, Steve. And they've also offered to go ahead and move toward that. So I don't know, I would hate to not take advantage of that.
And I mean, our end of it would be bringing it into some type of ordinance.
Right.
I mean, they can do the research, identify the properties, the areas. Then we would have to craft the ordinance, and we'd also have to have, again, we'd have to bring in the Wakefield merchants and work with them to try to get something that's agreeable to everyone,
Right.
to make it work and to get it passed.
Do you know how long ago the Wakefield Village didn't show an interest in this? Was it a long time ago, or was it pretty recent?
I don't know if it was when I came back on in 2014 or so, that there was a presentation from the historic, and I can't think of the woman's name, that they had someone go out and take pictures. So we had a slideshow that showed the various buildings, and there was discussion up to, I think it was from Wright Avenue or maybe even Post Road at Dockwray up to Columbia Street was the area that they were looking at, with a couple of side shoots into Robinson Street. So it was, and then it kind of fell by the wayside, and I don't know if it was funding or where, or just priorities got sidetracked.
Right.
I would imagine they would welcome us extending an invitation for them to try to move forward on some of these items.
I was just going to say, Susan, if you're interested, the Rhode Island HPHC has an inventory from 1984, preliminary report, I think they call it. Historic and Architectural Resources of South Kingstown, Rhode Island, the preliminary report. It has a pretty good inventory of older. You're nodding, so maybe you've seen it already.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
But are they protected? That's where I went.
Well, no, I mean, you have to know where they all are before you protect them.
Right.
And again, you need the ordinance.
Right.
So,
We're
Mr.
talking about a work plan, but when we talk about these different boards and commissions, what would be interesting is if we had a joint meeting, maybe with all the boards and commissions that relate to the planning board. And if each of the boards and commissions maybe just talk for 10 minutes about what they're working on and generate discussion between that. And Jamie, you're so good with graphics, it would be nice to have maybe a graphic which shows that how these commissions fit together. And, just to have the affordable housing, the historic, the conservation commission, the pedestrians, bikes and pedestrians, all to just talk for 10 minutes and all be in the same room might be that's just my thought.
I like that idea, Joe, but I think, I don't know if 10 minutes would be enough. So maybe what we could do is at each work session, bring in one group at the beginning of our work session,
Do that.
have a meet and greet and discuss some of our issues, their issues. And then at
And
the
that's
next meeting,
definitely a possibility, a way to skin the cat. I just didn't know whether it would result in other side discussions between the various commissions that maybe we don't necessarily in, but yeah, either way, Steve.
well, again, I would go with what the board in general feels. It's a group opinion, not just mine or yours or so. we work
I
as a
love this idea.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Everything is related, under the umbrella of land use.
Yeah, and I
The-
think this is Paul, to Joe's point, if we have meetings between the planning board and each individual board or commission, then they know what we're working on and we know what they're working on, but there isn't that cross talk. Like maybe the Historic District Commission doesn't know that they have some overlap with the Route 108 Special Management District. I mean, I think having everybody together at some point, I realize it's difficult, but that sort of cross-pollination might be useful.
Chairman Pedenci has an idea, and I know with COVID, we still have some concerns, but it was still the intent to have a kind of a breakout session on a Saturday morning or Saturday. I think we were originally talking about doing it in April, but we're still in COVID realm, and perhaps it's late May. We're still in budget season, so we're trying to avoid the nice summer months of June and July. But perhaps as we map potential work session meeting with the planning board and some of the invitees from the development community in a casual roundtable discussion, it may be germane, and we've done this before with other communities, where you invite a representative, typically it's the chairperson of the other land use boards and commissions, to just take 5 minutes, introduce themselves, tell you what you're working on and what their concerns are associated with land use. We are fortunate that we do staff, EDC, we do staff the Conservation Commission, Affordable Housing Collaborative, Historic District Commission, but we don't staff the zoning board. That's in a separate department. So we do have good lines of communication. We do have the connections to our chairpersons as well as our board at the staff level. So that is something we could potentially explore. Again, I don't want to make the group too big because it will take away from the intended purpose of the meeting, but having one representative potentially from each board, maybe in a morning session, to sit across the table from the planning board and quickly have go around the table. If there's 6 commissions in 5 minutes each, or even 10, that's only 30 minutes, or at a maximum 60 minutes. But it puts names and faces and ideas together in the same room. And you'll find out you have a lot of common ground. You're all talking about similar things.
right,
Well, Jamie, just a thought on that. I know that, obviously several of the items on the list kind of engage other groups as well. So I wonder if when, we could really try to have some joint work sessions, either with all of them or with some of them on some of these topics from the beginning, because to help scope them. Because it really does, most of these fall under the concern and interest of other boards that they may have had a piece of it, let it be in the zoning where they're reviewing something similar, or in the recreation committee, open space committee or something, they've been thinking about farms, so maybe there's an opportunity also within some of these priority projects to include other groups in the initial scoping and or regular updates.
I think that, Pam, that's a good idea. And my note was, engage stakeholders early on in the discussion.
Okay. Any other comments from board members? If not, I'll see if there's anyone in the attendees that would like to speak. If they do, please raise your hand. Okay, I guess not. All right, so Jamie, you have your work cut out for you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Jay.
I just wanted to circle back to Pam's points. I kind of feel like her points didn't get addressed, everybody else's did, but her two topics, a municipal resiliency grant and the coastal overlay district.
Mhm.
Real quick, I had spoken with, is it Sean O'Rourke? Yeah, Sean O'Rourke for the municipal grant last year. And the town, we weren't in a position with a shovel-ready project that we were ready to get behind. So we weren't able to submit anything with that round. I have not heard much from my office, in my office anyway, in regards to this year, but we'll certainly keep our eye out for it. And the coastal overlay district, we also don't have much to report on that. If you recall, the ordinance was put together and required a sign off, the CRMC sign off, but all of that happens through the building and zoning department. And we're not aware of what happens. Actually, since the ordinance has really gone through, we haven't really heard much in light of any issues that they've had or sign offs from where they needed to contact planning to get information on that. So I will speak to Jamie Gorman, the building and zoning official, and try to get an update for you and come back to the board and report out on that.
All right, thank you, Jay.
Great. Thank you.
And Jay, thank you. That was, must have occurred when I was having some technical difficulties.
Well, I don't know. I think you're the curse because my computer crashed. I had to go to the iPad and I don't know.
Mr. Devossi, that it is literally to the minute, if not the second, of exactly when I had the same technical difficulties last night at the town council hearing. I was on deck to present the comprehensive community plan.
I did witness that.
Yes.
Yeah, somebody in your house is streaming Game of Thrones right at that moment, right? Reruns.
I'm at the end of a cul-de-sac, and I think at 7:45 or so, everybody goes, ate dinner and then goes to Netflix or something.
All right, so if we're all set with the annual work program, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the affordable housing ordinance. And I believe we had Josh Daly in the audience as well. And he's got his hand raised. Josh, you're in the meeting?
Yep.
Hello?
Hi, thanks.
Thank you for being so patient through the early part of the meeting.
Oh, sure. No problem.
So did you want to address this for us, Josh, or did you want staff to walk us through this?
Well, I'm happy to give you some of the basics, and then I'm happy for Brian to chime in as well, and then for you to ask any questions that you have. So I think I've got two things that we've been working on actively in the Affordable Housing Collaborative Committee for a while now, and we're excited to be able to present them to town council. And we wanted Joe's encouragement, and we all definitely agreed that we wanted you to be able to review them as well. Just for information, we are bringing these forward to the town council, and I think we expect that after budget season is over, they may have me there. So, so the two things are around the Affordable Housing Fund, of course, and around the tax abatements around accessory dwelling units. And I outlined them in, or we outlined them in the cover letter here. So the main thing is the Affordable Housing Fund recommendations are, that there has been this Affordable Housing Fund, but it hasn't had sort of a framework for how to use the money. And so what we did was to revisit that ordinance and put in some language that creates a framework for how to use the money and establishes an application process for those who want to use money from the Affordable Housing Fund, and how we would then review the applications. So that we attached the documents as well. You can see the actual, full ordinance there, and you can see the language that we added in particular, if you pull up those documents. In particular, I think a lot of the action is going on around items F, G, and sort of beyond there. So, and I, so F is suitable contributions. We made some recommendations. You can see some of the change in language there. If you look around directing revenue that could come from funded by the town ordinance or state or federal law, we put in an application process, outlined what that would look like in section G, and outlined what types of awards we might make in section I. So anyway, riveting reading, I would imagine. But I think exciting because, it hopefully allows us then to pursue ways of making sure that that's funded. Brian has his hand up. I've been talking too much.
No, I just wanted to say that I noticed that the document that got attached to the agenda didn't come through with the red line strikeout on it. And I have that available to put up if the planning board members want to see it. That sometimes happens when you convert a document to PDF. So if the board members didn't get it and want to see the actual edited version, I'd be glad to put that up.
Brian, does Affordable Housing make their request directly to the council, or does it have to come through the planning board?
No, I mean, yeah, they're not really advisory to the planning board, so they don't need a sign off, so to speak, from the planning board before they go to the town council. But Joe is your liaison on the board, and he asked that we sort of bring it through you for informational purposes.
Okay. I just want to be clear on what path this was taking.
Yeah, with the affordable housing language, as Josh said, it was there. It wasn't being actively funded to any great extent. Rob Zarnetsky did make some changes and start directing some money into it, but there really wasn't a process to get it out. So we've created an application framework so that we can start fielding and processing applications. The Affordable Housing Collaborative doesn't have any final decision making on those applications, but they do review them and make recommendations to the manager and the council.
Thank you. Staff, Paul?
So Josh, how big a grant potentially could someone apply for? And would it actually be a make or break for the project? I'm looking at, the application form where there's an attestation from the applicant supported by appropriate documentation that the project would not otherwise be able to proceed without the requested support, which makes me think that would be a sizable chunk of change.
So, Brian, help me out here if I'm missing this, but I am, there's some language on what we would seek to be able to award just ourselves with the discretion of the Affordable Housing Collaborative. And then the other types of awards over that threshold would go before the town council. What did we say that
Yeah,
threshold?
there is a lower level of awards. I think it was under $7,500 where the
That's
town
right.
manager would have the ability to award those independently. There really is no upper limit. I believe the language that you're referencing, Paul, was actually something that Joe suggested. He wanted to make sure that if monies came out of the Affordable Housing Fund, that they were essential to the success of the project rather than just increasing the profit of the developer on the back end. Because we are allowing these to be open to for-profit developers. We just don't want to be needlessly padding somebody's paycheck. We
That's
want
good foresight.
Some of the discussion, and maybe it didn't make it exactly into that wording, was that we did not want funds to go to a project that would otherwise have to do affordable anyways. We wanted this to encourage affordable housing. So a developer that came that was doing 2 out of 10 units because of the inclusionary zoning, we did not want necessarily money to go to that. They have to do it anyways. This was to encourage new development or additional development of affordable housing. That was some of the discussion.
Okay.
I had a couple of questions on item F, which is under suitable contributions, and under 4, where it talks about the ability of the fund to have the ability to hold land or real property for subsequent award, sale, or other disposition, et cetera. Is there or will there be any criteria associated with this?
What criteria?
not
ahead, Bill.
not at this moment. I will note that that's existing language in the affordable housing ordinance. That's not something that we added or even really amended moving forward with this. Certainly, if you have a suggestion or a concern, it's certainly something we're willing to listen to.
It might just make it easier going forward once this fund, which is, I think, very necessary, is in working order. And it would, just as there have been ranking criteria in the past for things like open space acquisition, I think it may be helpful. And also, since we don't have the red line version, wondering if this is existing or if on page, no page, let's see, under review and recommendation number, I think it's page 4, number 5, it says project location relative to walkable public transit, stores, services, employment, and amenities, which could include several things, but I think it would be helpful to specifically mention parks or greenways or open space kind of facilities, because I believe that those are equally important to some of these other specific areas that are called out in this. And again, I don't know if that's existing and hasn't been changed, but looking at it kind of from a fresh perspective, that occurred to me.
No, actually, that whole section H, Maria, is new. We decided that if we were going to be positively recommending projects or negatively recommending projects, we needed some criteria on which to base those determinations. So that's that's the list of criteria we came up with in our meetings. So I understand where you're coming from. I tried, certainly when I talk about, or when the Affordable Housing Collaborative talks about public amenities, I mean, certainly parks are public amenities. If you think it makes it stronger to, specifically include those things, we can certainly look at that.
Thanks.
I guess I'm also interested to know more of what you have in mind in terms of the criteria, because I think that's the criteria that I think you're pointing to are the things that are in that section H, right? The things that are sort of meant to be how we assess projects.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay, good.
And, I think of sort of when we talk about affordable housing, we also are of the mindset that, being adjacent to open space or greenways or parks is very important and very necessary, and want it to be made very clear. That will also, I think, help in terms of the bigger picture, looking at the town as a whole, where we ultimately plan for greenways, parks, open spaces, and so on.
Mhm. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Maybe they could incorporate in the application form, Maria, some of the criteria. Or like a checklist, are you offering this? Are you near that? And that might
Sure.
be an easier way than to try to write it into the ordinance, is just have a checklist or on the application form.
That's a good idea.
Can definitely look at that, Steve, because we haven't even started work on that yet. So
Yeah. And then might help you in grading who's, what application is more suitable to your end result.
yeah, we could actually have them provide a list of everything in a 5-minute walk or a 10-minute walk radius, something like that.
No, it's a very good effort.
Any other questions or comments about the Affordable Housing Fund ordinance in particular?
All right, well, then we had the
tax abatement.
Tax abatement.
For accessory dwelling units. So again, in the cover letter that I sent along to, shared with you was, sort of outlines what this is about. This was a fairly lengthy set of conversations and meetings over a couple of years among the Affordable Housing Collaborative, and glad to be putting it forward to the town council. So there's sort of two main things going on in this proposed incentive program. So one is it's incentivizing the creation of, I think when I speak to you, you're familiar when I say capital A versus lowercase a affordable housing, housing affordability more broadly, and then actually deed restricted, capital A affordable housing. So the idea of the program and the incentives is to incentivize the creation of both types of housing. So lowercase a affordable units, there's the tax abatement for a period of 5 years for all new accessory dwelling units built in town. We've talked about capping it in a pilot program at 20 to start, and then seeing how that goes. And then it would also incentivize the creation of capital A affordable housing, the deed restricted affordable housing, by exempting the units from taxation for the period during which they have the deed restriction and they're occupied by a low to moderate income individual or family. So that is the sort of action going on. That's the summary of what this is. We had pretty robust conversations for a while. We did leave in some language. There was a a discussion and about whether it should be targeted to new construction or all deed restricted ADUs, so new and existing. We ended up going with new construction as a means of incentivizing that, but left language in there for the town council to consider around what it would look like to do new and existing. So that language is in, if you look through it, section 1783, there's both sections. The alternative language is in there as well.
That's an interesting thought on the existing, because I don't know if we really have a handle on how many are out there. And there, a lot of them probably in years past were built for a family member, whether it be a mother, father, or in-law, which may be empty now because that person has passed. So it would be an opportunity for them to reduce their tax basis. So I kind of like that idea, because it has existing units that may be out there that can become readily available and don't have to be built.
So I think the language, and that's a great point. And I think, I'm hoping that there'll be a good discussion with the town council on that, and we'll, zero in on language. I think some of the concern was the two different things. So there's two different pieces. There's the 5-year abatement for any new, and then the 30-year for any unit that is deeded affordable. So I think, you wouldn't do the 5-year abatement for anyone who puts it on the rolls. Or I don't know, that I think that creates the wrong type of incentive, right? Because if someone's built it, it's not on the rolls. There is some advantage to the town knowing about these units that might be existing, but I don't know that the town wants to do a tax abatement for those units, unless, I think to your point, if there were, the 30-year deed restriction, then that could be very attractive.
Yeah, they probably need Gene to do an analysis of what that impact would be.
Right, exactly.
If they all came off as taxable units.
One thing I will state is that Gene participated in several of these meetings, not only to discuss the impact, but also to discuss process applications, and also his thoughts on what is equitable to the various residents of the town. So Gene did participate. I want to say probably at least 3 meetings. I'm not quite sure, but I think it was 3 meetings.
That's true. And had some great feedback, and we had some robust discussions around this issue, among other things. Yeah.
Question, is the amount of or percentage of the tax exemption at all based on what the need is, meaning the AMI percentage? Like, would you get a greater tax exemption if you were doing 80% AMI or lower versus 100 or 120?
We didn't get into that as such, because we really created the abatement rather than exemption. We also went back and forth on abatement versus exemption, and there's language here that looks like both, and it does have both. But we didn't get into the weeds of what level LMI and different levels of abatement for different levels of LMI. It's a good question. I think it's we just didn't get into it for this. And the other thought is that this is meant to be a pilot program with 20 that we put out there for the first year, and we'll see sort of what comes out of that.
This is Susan. Can I ask a couple of questions?
Please.
First off, I'd like to say that any accessory unit that becomes affordable, I think should be included in any kind of break we can give them to incentivize people to put a deed restriction on a property. But I'd like to understand, if I built an accessory unit on my property for my mom to live in, that's not going to be on the market. It's not going to be available to other people in the community. what is the thought process behind giving me a tax break for building an apartment over the garage for my family member to live in? If that'll never be available to the public as housing, what's the thought there on the incentive?
It's a good question. So I think I can't speak, I don't know, I'm trying to remember discussions that we may have had relative to that, and Joe and Brian, help me if you recall particular things, but I hear the concern in the question.
So I bring the discussion, I guess there was discussion on a couple of things. One is creating additional units. And yes, maybe some of those will never hit the market, but the vast majority probably will at some point. If not now, maybe when the elderly parent's not living there. So that's one. The other thing I would say, and this kind of goes back to Marie, this is by no means a windfall for the property owner, because the property owner, if they do deed restriction, not only are they most likely accepting a lower rent, but they also have to employ a monitoring agent. And a monitoring agent could be up to $1,000 a year. So that alone could be very close to the tax offset. So we're kind of lessening the burden on the property owner to establish, this on a deed restriction. So
I think the thought also was that if it were, where some of the idea of the pilot is seeing how people use it and what they do with it, right? And what potential abuses we see or things that are not what we want to incentivize. So I think some of the thinking was similar to what Joe said, that, the creation of these units might not immediately create stuff that goes on the market if it goes in your scenario. But it may also create a situation where, a parent who's aging and doesn't need a full house that they live in could, move into an accessory unit and have someone else, move, whether it be their kids, adult children, move into a home or something like that. We're sort of open to that as a possible use, and want to see, in this pilot, what that looks like. But I think I'm hearing a concern that you would want more units actually on the market and not necessarily just for family benefit. Is that?
also consider that elderly parent that moves into that apartment over the garage that you created is no longer competing for an apartment in town, which is now available for someone else. So the whole idea was to create more small A affordable housing. And even if you end up with a parent that otherwise would be in an apartment, you're moving in that direction.
Right. So if I could ask another question, how cumbersome is it to convert my accessory dwelling into an LMI unit? And is it, because some of these, it says you'll get a tax abatement as long as it is considered LMI. So can I just sort of drift in and out, put it on for a couple of years, take it back off? Like, is there a commitment to how long I'm listed as a affordable unit? Or is it cumbersome enough that I won't just do it for a couple of years, take it away, do it for a couple of years? Like, is there a term here that you would expect people to commit to?
You're in for a minimum of 30. You're in for a minimum of 30 years if you do it.
Okay.
You'll note, Susan, that it specifically says that you are deed restricted under the State Low Moderate Income Housing Act, which is 30 years. So
okay,
you're in for 30 years.
Thank you.
And to your previous question about, people creating units for mom and dad to move in, I think in talking about it, we were willing to gamble on a 5-year tax abatement just to get the unit created, because unless you're going to deed restrict it, you're only going to get that 5 years.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions of Josh or of Joe in regards to these taxation?
I think
presentation?
I was just surprised at $1,000 a year for the monitoring agent.
That is the
That's
numbers
a-
that we've heard in
Whew.
discussions, yeah.
Wow.
Mm.
We're not, I mean, to be honest, we're not sure how much this will incentivize the deed restricted piece of things. We're interested to see, the extent to
Yeah.
which it might, but it can be onerous. So, someone has to
Absolutely.
really want that, I think, still, and but our hope is that it does incentivize and give people a taste for, you could do this. This could be, beneficial for you as well as for the community.
Yeah, are those tax deductible fees
That's a good
with a
question.
rental, with a rental unit, Amy?
I cannot pretend to have any expertise as a tax lawyer. I do not know the answer to that.
Okay. Joe, excuse me, Paul.
Yeah, I'm just curious what happens if somebody agrees to this and then sells their house in 5 years? Does it carry over the next owner or do we start over again?
Runs with the
It's right in the
property.
deed.
Runs with the property. Okay, interesting.
Hmm.
Nice.
Now,
That's
whether or
not-
not they disclose it, that's a buyer beware issue.
Bill, yeah.
I have one more question.
Mhm.
So it says in here in section 17 that any property owner who shall record a deed restriction will receive the tax deduction. But then on this other side, on section 1786, it says that ADUs that have received a building permit prior to the adoption of this ordinance are not eligible. So it sounds like maybe I can transfer my existing ADU into the program, but I can't if all I have is a building permit. Am I misunderstanding this? It says ADUs that have received a building permit prior to the adoption of this are not eligible.
Well, they only allow 20 per year, first of all, so that may have,
What's the first piece that you were
Yeah,
referring
but
to?
you may have, you have made,
1786A, but what was the first piece that you were referring to?
Okay, so the one about a building permit is section 17-86, eligibility and limitations,
Right, I see that.
A.
Yep.
But on the other, right before that, on section 17-83, alt B,
Mhm.
any property owner who shall record a deed restriction that qualifies shall
So
be
the-
entitled.
So the reason for that is because, as you see, we left, there's two section 1783s because we left in the previous language that could be adopted. So the first section 1783, which is above what you were just reading, is what would be left in. The second one is alternative language that could be adopted, and if that were, then I think that section 1786A would have to be. Go ahead.
you may have found something there that we need to clarify, Susan. So 1783 obviously only applies to you if you are actually deed restricting a property for 30 years. I think 1786A is more targeted at that 5-year exemption. So in order to get the 5-year exemption, it actually has to be new. You can't come to the town with an existing ADU and get your 5-year exemption. And we looked at the trigger point being whether or not you had a building permit already.
yeah, that makes sense.
So I will look at that and see if we need to clarify that. It sounds like we do.
Brian, this is Amy and Josh, thank you. This is a good discussion. Can you clarify, and I apologize if you've said it already, are you going to present the council with the different alternatives, or are you going to propose your preferred alternative and explain the options that were considered?
We will present our proposed alternative, our section 1783, the first one. We'll present that as the preferred alternative, but we left the language in there for them to consider if they wanted to.
Yeah. We noted
Okay,
that
so
in the
that-
cover
so-
letter that went to the council, that we had discussed both options, that we would like to present it with alt A, but we wanted to know that we had also discussed alt B, and we're also more or less fine with that solution as well.
Okay.
All right. Any further discussion on this from board members, staff?
This has been in progress for a long time, so thank you, Josh, for carrying this over the finish line.
Yeah, it's just always amazing how long these things take. And of course, you've had issues with COVID, you've had issues with making your quorum, so it's never easy, but when it's finally done, it's nice.
Yeah, it's satisfying. We're hoping it'll be well received, and we always, the idea of doing it as a pilot is recognizing that there are going to be things that we learn in this process, and definitely appreciate your really thoughtful questions and comments. I think they'll help us to really improve and clarify what we've got here.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, Josh.
Yeah,
you all.
thanks. Good luck.
All right. It is 9:01. Does board members want to take a 5-minute break before we continue, or do you want to move on? Yes, 5-minute break.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. We'll see you back in 5 minutes.
The clock keeps us honest.
Exactly. That was a good idea of Jay's.
That was awesome.
Yeah, the red, I don't know though. The red is a little bit intimidating.
All right, now we're waiting for Pam. And she's back. Okay, next item on our agenda is the Route 1 Stewardship Committee.
Mr. Chairman, the intent of this agenda item, again, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director, was just to inform the board that our intent as staff of that committee to ask them to reconvene in May. And we'll do every attempt to bring them back to the table and continue the discussion on developing the plan associated with the Route 1 corridor.
Did you get a full membership finally? Because weren't you still looking for some public members?
That is one of the tasks to do in April, is to make sure we have a full complement. And again, it's been a few months in the COVID world where that committee has not gotten together, and we need to garnish continued interest as well as the makeup of that board.
And Mr. Chairman, as far as I'm aware, we did lose a member. I believe it was the commercial property owner on Route 1, fixed slot on the membership committee that member resigned. I believe the clerk's office has advertised for it. I am not aware of the status of that at the moment, though.
Okay.
I'm not aware that interview has been held by town council for that position yet.
Right.
We will.
How many members are on that committee?
11, I believe.
How many?
11.
11, okay.
Yeah.
So that they'd have enough to get a quorum anyway, I would think.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Maria, did you have anything to add?
No, it's just good news that we're going to be reconvening and hope to have positive results.
Okay, great. I guess we heard from the Affordable Housing Collaborative already, Joe. So we should be all set there. I don't know if there's any other, I don't think there's any other committees outstanding right now. So that brings us up to the update from the Planning Department.
Again, Mr. Chairman, we have been working diligently on finalizing a comprehensive plan, still trying to catch edits as we occasionally review that. That was subject to a public hearing last night at the town council meeting. There were 4 individuals who spoke regarding the complexity of the plan, the timeline associated with the development of the plan. There was a sentiment amongst the 4 about the limited nature of the public advertisement and access to the comprehensive community plan. So some of the 2 primary things and takeaways from town council was in essence, I want to say it was a motion, but consensus by town council to have the planning department develop a question and answer portal through our department webpage, as well as potentially hosting a listening session that would be sponsored and operated through the planning department, primarily through the director, where we would invite the public to a kind of roundtable listening session, whether we can do that in person or via Zoom with our COVID protocols. We will determine that as time progresses, but we would look at potentially holding that visioning session on Thursday, potentially May 6th, May 3rd, or May 13th, which would be roughly 2 weeks before the continuation of the public hearing by the town council.
Amy, can we discuss this or do we have to have it added to the agenda?
You can ask for consensus to add specific discussion of the comprehensive plan status to the agenda item. It's for discussion only, so that's fine.
Okay, do we have a consensus? Raise your hand that we can discuss this. All right, we have a unanimous. I did watch that meeting last night. Did any other board members watch that?
I did.
You did. There seemed to be a lot of discussion about that we didn't have enough public input in that.
I don't know. I felt like it was more about the difficulty to compare the previous plan to the newer draft. And as we have discussed before, the fact that because of the difference in program, no redlining.
Yeah.
That's what seemed to be the
I just,
major
the
difficulty.
sentiment, some of the sentiment I got out of it, that they wanted us to, take more public comment. And I mean, it was like pulling teeth trying to get public comment when we finished up the last time. And I mean, we had 4 people speak last night. But I don't think there was an overwhelming response that we had to redo anything. Like you said, Marie, maybe it's a misunderstanding on what was changed because the red lines were lost, but we spent a lot of time on it, and we moved it ahead to the town council, and it's really under their jurisdiction now. And if they want to make some changes, that's their prerogative.
It is. It totally is under their jurisdiction and their public hearing.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, again, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director. On behalf of the Planning Board, we will try to articulate the time frame associated with the development of the plan, better clarify the public participation. I know there were over 13 work sessions with the public. You had initial scoping with 50 people. You had an open house with in excess of 100 people. You had a second hearing kind of work session with over 50 people in attendance. You had public hearing testimony in the winter of 2019, November, December. In fact, you as a planning board were concerned about the public outreach and community responding to that you continued your comment period with the plan to seek that additional guidance from the community. And then you were in full COVID mode. There was a change in leadership within the department. Jay did an interim stint in the summer. I was brought in on September. The planning board looked at moving it to council in, I believe, late November, early December. We worked on edits and formats and turned that document over. I think it was a few days after a deadline that Councilman McElvey mentioned and was supported. I think one of the council members made a reference to the fact that I wouldn't be allowed to watch the Super Bowl on Sunday. So we're working on the comprehensive community plan all weekend. But again, to credit to our staff as well as the planning board, this was a multi-year project with a host of different changes in staff. It's a 300, close to a 400-page document, not including the appendixes. I think it's a yeoman effort by the community with public input. But at the council's direction, our department will again look back at the timeline, look back at the public participation, attempt to articulate that in a graphic or better graphic form, and then also provide the potential question and answer aspect of that. Because some of the questions, I think, if asked, we can easily answer them as staff. They're not policy decisions. We won't speak for the planning board, but if there's a question about population or goals and objectives, we can get the people to the right pages and the right element sections and attempt to provide that input.
And there seemed to be a lot of misunderstanding that kept coming back to the discussion last night about the surplus in government land and the schools. And that went back all the way to Chelsea. I mean, we just started, we at first thought the junior high was going to be abandoned. And we already knew South Road School was abandoned. And, you know, that started back in whenever Chelsea was here. So that was 3 or 4 years ago. That wasn't something that was brought up recently. So I don't know where that got started, but so.
Yeah. Again, we'll also try to clarify process. That question came up last night about the role of the comprehensive community plan as it relates to zoning, who gets to amend the plan, who gets to amend the zoning regulations. And again, we'll try and lay out that process so it's more clearly understood. There was some discussion on the gateway language, and in an attempt that the gateway language has existed in the document since 2019. But there was potentially concern that it's not clearly articulated, or just because the comprehensive community plan mentions a gateway aspect on Route 1 and 138, there's still a number of steps that have to occur with it with regards to zoning map changes, regulatory changes to the text of the zoning ordinance, which ultimately go to town council for decision and action. So in essence, because it's stated in the plan doesn't mean it makes it to its final form within a zoning document or with a change to the zoning map. So again, we'll work with Amy and with Mike guiding the council about trying to again make a second attempt at communicating the changes, the timeline, and what implications those changes have and what the process is moving forward.
Yeah, and
So-
don't, go ahead. I'm sorry, Susan, go ahead.
Sorry. So Jamie, at last night's meeting, I got the sense from maybe 2 people that they were very anxious about the volume of changes, 1,000 whatever changes to the documents. But I think what might need to be explained to folks is that you cannot put this document side by side with the old 2014 document and compare it line by line, which I think is what folks hope to be able to do. So I read almost the whole thing this winter. And what I did was I treated it like a standalone document. It's a brand new document, and read it for its current content, and then trusted you to articulate the things that have been changed that I needed to know about. And so I think it's just an explanation maybe to the public that if you can, if the planning staff can explain very concisely what's changed, they'll need to treat this like a brand new standalone document and not try to refer to the old document or remember the old document or try to compare line for line what it used to say. And I think that's where some of the frustration was last night, was that people want to like sit with 2 books in their lap and go back and forth, and that's not going to happen. So moving forward, there's a better way to tackle this.
Yeah. And Susan, again, that's part of our role in the department to again try to clarify and perhaps articulate it in a different manner that's more digestible. And again, we did have some technical difficulties at the beginning of the presentation. Rob Zaneski stepped in on my behalf. I know there was an attempt for Jay to also participate. Part of the slide presentation at the beginning, and again, Rob was filling in, but is the articulation that there are, in essence, new sections of the plan that were mandated by changes in Rhode Island law.
Right.
Wasn't that the planning board of South Kingston decided, hey, let's do a whole section on energy. Let's do a whole new section about resiliency. Those were mandated by Rhode Island law. So that added pages to it. They may have been mentioned in 2014 in prior plans, but Rhode Island law required them to be quantified in separate sections and addressed. There was also a few changes in the reformatting of grouping, open space and recreation together, and cultural resources and historic together. And those were different categories in the 2014 plan. So again, some of the slides that I presented attempted to articulate those. But again, we'll try and put that timeline and that information out there. And again, not in a
Right.
better, perhaps in a different manner that's more clearly understandable.
But I think you have articulated the changes pretty well. And I think folks just need to
I
trust,
tried to.
trust you. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried.
And just the fact that all the maps were updated is, that's a significant number of changes right there, that just because they were out of date. So, and a lot of those were typographical errors or grammar errors that were corrected, so I don't know. But
And Mr. Chairman, Susan makes a good point. The 2021 draft plan is a standalone document. It is meant to replace the 2014 plan. Yeah. And the themes, a lot of the themes are carried through, a lot of the articulation on goals and objectives are similar in the new plan, but it is the current plan. And again, it's not sit at the coffee table and look at one and have the other side by side and do a page by page comparison. I don't think it was ever intended to be done in that manner.
any other comments? All right. Amy, Joe, did you have one? Oh, Pam?
Sorry, I thought you meant about that one in particular. I just wanted to let you all know that a few weeks ago, I sent in my notice to the town clerk saying that I do not wish to be considered for reappointment to the planning board. I've been on the board since 2013. And it's time for me to move on. So.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you had sent a letter in saying you wanted to be reappointed.
See, I had sent you, I thought that I had sent you and the staff a copy of that, but
I thought I saw in last night's correspondence that you sent a letter to the council saying you wanted to be reappointed.
okay.
I could have swore that was, I don't have it handy, but I thought that was under correspondence that you and I think Paul, did you send in saying you wanted to be reappointed?
I will check with them. I had said no, and
And I gave up at 10:35, so I'm not sure if they did any appointments at the end of the meeting, but you might have been reappointed.
so did Jamie, Jay, Brian, and Steve, you didn't get my email that I sent to you?
No,
No.
I'm
did
just curious why none of you responded to me.
yeah, because I would have said something immediately.
Okay,
Maybe you have time to reconsider.
I'll talk to the town clerk.
Town council was even considering an increase in the stipend, Pam. We talked about the pros outweigh the cons.
They got it. It was just denied.
I think you should sleep on it tonight and give us some thought. I mean, we're making the meeting shorter.
I know you are. No, I didn't realize I was actually on since 2013. And there's other things I want to do. So I feel very confident that both the staff and the board are in really good shape. So.
And Pam, there are several openings on affordable housing. I think they're down 3 members right now. So, feel free.
There you go, or the Route 1 team as well.
You're gonna take a pay cut, though.
I'll take a little break and then decide.
I'll ask you again to reconsider it overnight, but I understand where you're coming from, and we appreciate the time you put in. And your input's always been welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been I feel like I should have paid the town because I learned a whole lot.
Hey, Pam, you might want to reach out to the clerk's office because on the agenda last night, it does say reappointments for terms expiring May 2021. Paul Jordan and Pam Rubinoff wish to be reappointed.
I sent them a note saying no. I probably even have a copy of it. Okay.
Oops,
I will.
it looks like you're still on board for another term.
Thank you.
I tell you what, we'll accept your resignation in 3 years.
Well, something's working, in favor of that, given. that
It might be
neighbors do something
fate.
Different,
Yeah,
huh? And you guys didn't receive my email. Okay.
this could be your destiny, Pam.
Yeah.
I think maybe Jamie did receive the email and he changed it before forwarding it to Susan, to the clerk.
Well, I didn't see it because I obviously would have reached out to you, Pam, and said something.
Well, I thought that, and then I thought I looked at it
And I
again.
apologize that I didn't, but I didn't get it.
Okay, something was going against this. Yeah, this is really weird. Maybe I really didn't do this. Okay. Anyway, I'll,
This could be a COVID fog. What? You were composing the letter and never really did it.
so instead of surprise to you guys, it's a surprise to me. Okay.
All right. Amy, did you have anything?
Yes, this is Amy. I just want to advise the board that the Fieldstone Farm SHAB decision. Can you hear me okay? I'm getting a
Yes.
unstable internet connection pop up. The developer of Fieldstone Farms appealed that SHAB decision to Superior Court. I don't want to discuss it substantively tonight or really at any point because it's in litigation now. And you may remember that the developer, it was a couple years ago now, filed a simultaneous appeal to SHAB and to the Superior Court. So now there's two Superior Court appeals. Really, it doesn't make a difference. It's the same issue. But so this gives us a chance to renew the arguments we made before SHAB. And I will keep you advised as the litigation progresses. Again, though, because, and it may be that the developer will come back with a preliminary plan application at the same time they pursue an appeal. I just don't know. But in any event, I think it's quite likely that it will come back before the board at some point. So I don't want to have any comment on something that might come back before us, but I did want to advise you of that.
All right. Thank you for forewarning us. All right, if there's no other matters before this board, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a second. Second from, I'll take Pam's, Joe. Might be our last one. So all those in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous. Okay, we'll see you at our next meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Thank you all. Have a good night, Jay.
You too, Jamie.